welcome to the Guitar Department. I'm your host, Joe Alton. On this episode, I'm sitting here with Seth Hedquist. For those of you who don't know, Seth is one of the most prolific guitar players in the Des Moines area. Just opened his new studio. We're going to take a look at it a little bit later. But first, I wanted to sit down and talk to you for a minute. Thank you for being here, Seth.
It's a pleasure to be here. What you do with Guitar Department, this program is like truly a gift to all of us, so appreciate you having me back. Oh. It's not just a gift to us as guitar players and musicians, but anybody who's interested in guitar and music. So
thank you for the kind words, man. That's very nice of you to say.
Absolutely.
You and I go way back.
We do.
We went to SWIC together, Southwestern Community College, as have a number of guests I've had on the show, James Bean, Annie Kemble, a whole bunch of others. So catch me up. From the time you left SWIC, you've been doing freelance guitar work, right. And there's a little more to the story also. But tell me how it started from you right out of SWIC.
Out of SWIC, I decided to, I got an associate's. It's a community college, so right. I got my associate's degree from there. But I decided I wanted to finish a 4-year degree. So I went to Iowa State, and because I was already teaching quite a bit in music out of SWIC, like lessons and so forth, and doing some freelance playing, not as much as I wanted to right out of the gate, but I was trying to get my foothold in the scene. I decided to go back to school basically part-time at Iowa State, and for fear of burning out on music, I just picked history. It was just always another passion of mine.
And say it's something you had a passion for, right?
Yeah, correct. So I finished with a degree in history, I think in 2009, just a bachelor's degree in history. All the while still teaching, started at Ground Zero Music in Indianola.
Right.
Thanks to James Bean, who kind of, I think, helped me get a foot in the door there, and a foot in the door in many other places since. And then I taught in another place in West Des Moines for a while, and again, just tried to get into the scene as a guitarist, as a player. About 2 years after I graduated, I kind of had an itch to go write some more papers and read some more books, and so I entered back into Iowa State in their history program, this time as a graduate student, because I really liked my advisor, who became my advisor at Iowa State, my professor. So I finished with a master's degree in history, so that was all the while part of me, even right. as I was playing, even as I was teaching. It wasn't one then the other. They were always kind of going on at the same time, which is great because one refreshed the other.
Yeah.
So
and you sort of melded the two of them too.
I did, yeah. And I'm currently working on a full-length album based on my graduate research, because I wrote a 100-page thesis on a topic related to Iowa.
Yeah. Go ahead and sum that up for everybody. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. I'll read it to you.
Real quickly, what was that about? It was about musicians who played at the Farm Bureau events.
Yeah, early Iowa Farm Bureau musicians. I wanted to kind of study why they played for the organization, what they played, because there were agricultural leaders at the time in the 1910s and 20s who not only commented about what farmers should be farming, but interestingly enough, like what musicians should be playing. And I'm talking about people who didn't really necessarily have backgrounds in music. So I found that intriguing. Like, what are they thinking people in the country should be playing versus what they actually were? And so I found musicians who, sure, they were playing old-timey music, fiddle tunes, things that you might expect people in rural areas to be playing at the time. But I also found them keeping touch on very modern, this was the first generation radio listeners, so they were excited about that, and farmers listened to the radio a lot, not only for weather, but also, and other prices and things like that, but also they were listening for new modern trends in music.
For, entertainment purposes.
Correct. So it was just an interesting topic. I found a lot of interesting stories about musicians at the time. One in particular who recorded for the Library of Congress in 1937. He played an instrument called the hammered dulcimer, and so he got to record. And he was kind of initially it started as, okay, I'm going to find out about him, and then it became about his community, and then it became about more like a case study about Iowa at large. So,
you're recording an album.
I'm writing songs based on the research. I decided if the Kinks could make good concept albums, then maybe I should give it a try. so that's kind of part of the motivation anyway. But I also I never stopped thinking about my topic, and I've evolved even since the 8 years that I've graduated with a master's degree. So I just wanted to go back and look at it. What do I think I did right? What do I think I could change? And how could I say that in song? And it's been fun to kind of figure out how much, like, if it was difficult to put like a piece of history into an argument, just writing it, it's that much harder to put it into a 4-line stanza, you know, like, so it really made me think about, what am I really trying to say with this? And songs helped me do that in a way that, I don't know, it was fun, it's challenging, it's a little maddening at times, but it's been fun.
I think that's one of the hallmarks of music, is that it helps us say things that words themselves don't really encapsulate as well as you might want. And that's sort of the motivation behind music as a creative process in the first place.
Yeah, correct.
You have also, you were the house guitar player for the Civic Center for a long time, is that correct? Yeah,
I still play with the symphony periodically when they call, if they need a guitar player. Oftentimes that's a case where maybe a Broadway singer is coming through town, and they have a very mixed array of material. So that started with people like Audra McDonald and Sutton Foster, Broadway singers like that. And they would have a very varied repertoire. So I remember with Sutton Foster, I had, I think, 4 guitars on stage and a banjo, you know, and so, because they do everything from kind of classic Broadway material to even more.
So it was just like a night with Sutton Foster type
of
event?
just a one-night concert with Sutton Foster, and then that kind of helped me get into the door as far as like traveling Broadway musicals. So I've played for the Carole King musical, Tina Turner musical that was just here. I'll be playing for The Wiz. It's not Broadway, but The Wiz coming up in December. I'll be playing for that. TV special made into kind of a stage show.
And so just to kind of unpack that, though, that means that the touring acts, the touring Broadway companies that put on these shows actually hire the local musicians to come in and play for their productions.
Often, very often. Like, Hamilton didn't, to my knowledge. I would have gladly taken part, but you know, some traveling Broadway shows are what we call self-contained. Like, they basically travel with everybody if they have the means to. But yeah, many of them travel with maybe, you know, the conductor is also the lead keyboardist and kind of like conducting both what's happening above stage and below. And then they may travel with a drummer or a bassist, and even sometimes a guitar player, and I'll jump in kind of the Guitar 2 book. But yeah, a lot of times, like in the case of The Wiz, they've hired quite a few of us here locally to complete that band. So, and it's just fun to be a part of. I love Broadway. I love reading down charts and kind of trying to recreate these shows, and being the, you know, part of what's making this show of 1,000 upon thousands of details work, you know. And
then musical theater, just as a production, is almost like a decathlon for musicians, because you have to be well-rounded. There's no other option. You have to be able to play rock and jazz and rockabilly and all the different variations that come with it. The styles of music that you would just never even think of that come up in song. And it's always a challenge. I've done several myself that are, it's not an endurance type of thing, but you have to really, it's cerebral. You have to think about it quite a lot to get it down.
Definitely, and it's one of the most gratifying things about a performance or a gig like that is, like, every time I walk away from a different Broadway show, I feel like a better musician. You know, just that feeling of I got to work out, and I just feel like I'm in a different place than where I was before I looked at the book and tried to tackle all those styles, because sometimes a single Broadway show can throw a lot of things at you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's one of the things I love about those kind of performances. So,
speaking of being in a different place, you have been for a long time a teacher at the Central Iowa Music Lab, James Bean's teaching organization, and you just recently branched off and you have your own studio.
Correct.
Tell me about that. Tell me about the motivation behind that.
I taught at the Central Iowa Music Lab for 12 years. It's a very near and dear place to my heart and always will be. I think what prompted me to start to carve out a new place was that a couple of years ago, I think coming out of the pandemic, I think vaccinations were out, but it was still a little dangerous to travel. In any case, there was like a summer where I had an unusual number of jazz students who did not take the summer off, and they still needed something to do. So I ultimately said, okay, with jazz students, I'm gonna go to weekly hour lessons. I think I mentioned that earlier to you. Just half hour was not sufficient. So if you want to take jazz, you got to take an hour from me weekly. And all of a sudden, because it was summertime and we were doing this hour thing, all of a sudden we had time to do stuff and like make music. And I know that sounds weird, but it wasn't all about, my experience teaching jazz a lot of times before that in the half-hour setting was very much like, you know, they've got their jazz band music. They want to try to make sense of what is a wealth of material inside of a half hour. And so sometimes the best we could do was teach a couple of chord shapes and then, all right, see you next time. Good luck at rehearsal. When this opportunity happened, this unforeseen opportunity to actually really have time to work things out with students, we started to make music almost immediately, in the sense that, like, if they needed to learn, say, the cycle of fourths, we would learn that in the key of A, keep all the notes in the key of A, and we would try to memorize that in 10 minutes. If we had 60 minutes to work with, we would try to memorize that. They would have to learn how to play it, say it as they go, and I might throw the Fly Me to the Moon melody over the top, you know, or something familiar like that. If it was, you know, if that was a little bit more to bite off for certain students, you know, a lot of pop music even today is 4 chords over and over again. We would work with kind of a shorter song form, but the idea was to take something that they knew, a melody, and not so much to push like jazz repertoire in the colloquial sense onto them, but kind of find out, like, what do you listen to? What are the melodies you know? And so that could be anything from like Heat Waves by Glass Animals to like, you know, to Radioactive by Imagine Dragons. They've got a lot of these like short song forms. And if they could play the melody, I could back them up, but then we could switch, because if I'm backing them up with 4 notes, then I expect them to be able to back me up as well. That's just part of what we do as jazz musicians. So in short, this summer, a couple of years ago, I just noticed we had time, and we could just make a lot of music in that amount of time. And it wasn't about so much how much can I, you know, throw at you from a theoretic standpoint. Just like, let's just make music. Let's just make music for a while. And in the process, and this kind of is where it expands to, say, a student from, say, 8 or 9 years old to retired age. In the process, like, you only need 2 or 3 notes to improvise, sometimes even just 1. And so what I try to do is we just make stuff up. I'll have a student kind of pick a string, or I'll pick a string and explore that string while I play this series of notes. And I just want you to find the notes that you feel are right for you. And again, like I was telling you earlier, a little bit before we actually started filming, like sometimes they'll find a note that is theoretically, all sorts of alarm bells are going off in my mind, but it's like, that's part of their story right now. If they want to pick this note that is totally out of key and they just want to play it, and it's amazing how often it happens that even if it's an out of key note or an in key note, they play it with such an intention that I'm sold anyway. And then we can get into things like, okay, you've got these 3 notes. Well, the distance between them, that's a whole step. That's what we call a whole step, 2 frets apart. And we can start to sort of sprinkle in these sort of theoretic things. But for the most part, it's all discovered through playing. Just playing, sometimes the entire half hour or hour. And that's just what I decided to do. If I'm going to see these people for only 30 minutes to 60 minutes, we are going to play and make music as much as possible.
And that's something that I've always thought as a teacher as well. There are certain things that you really can't be taught. You can only learn. You can develop the knowledge, but me saying it to you is not going to help. It might provide some context once you start to realize what you're actually doing, but the initial note picking, lick building, stuff like that, you just have to develop it. There's no other substitute. So that's sort of a brilliant philosophy. I use backing tracks and playing with my students all the time. But, usually with some sort of scale structure, but just to have them pick a string, single string type stuff. We were doing this a little bit before the camera started rolling. Do you want to demonstrate it now?
Sure. So and what I asked you to do earlier is just kind of, we'll just go on the B string, and this is something that's beautiful about guitar, but I suppose other instruments as well, is that you can sort of just explore the instrument, and organically, this is just an exercise in sound and interaction with sound. So I play a series of, say, 4 notes, and maybe you just pick the B string, and I'm just going to kind of start this series of 4 notes, and I just want you to explore that string. So here it goes. times where when I hit my first note in the sequence, you landed on that B.
Yeah.
Whether by accident or by intention, it doesn't really matter, but now you would make it intentional. So every time I hit the first note in the sequence, you're on that note.
Yep. That's
For whatever reason, we don't have to know why just right now, but here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. What do you think about that note? That one you just played on the 4th note. Did it work?
It was sort of dissonant, but I can tell that I'm staying within the key. The first time we did it a second ago, I intentionally strayed from the key.
Okay, yeah. Just to kind of experiment.
And I have the ear that I can just hear that I'm in the key. I also know the notes that I'm playing too, so it's a bit skewed by the theory that I already have.
I know, right? It's tough. You almost have to pretend like, yeah, maybe you're 9 years old and guitar is completely new, which I know is a tough thing to just ask. Because, but the amazing thing I've found from this exercise is once we develop like some intentionality behind it, like, okay, now you've got this note, it goes with this note that I'm playing, try to play it every time, and then they find a second note that maybe works. Pretty soon you develop a melody of 3 or 4 notes that just works for the student, and there's no, I don't ask, I mean, they don't have to explain why. They don't have to justify anything to me, even if my theory brain is going, okay, yeah, you know, like whatever. But the idea is then we can take it in any number of directions. We could just work out, when you're dealing with few notes, that makes rhythm this whole like potential area to explore. So a lot of times, you know, even if I change up my rhythm somewhat, that automatically causes a reaction in the student, or vice versa. Like sometimes they'll find the note they're really comfortable with, and just on their own, they'll kind of like, you know, and just, which might make me then react in a certain way.
Right.
And so I love this exercise because it's organic. We're just dealing with sound, not necessarily, so we're not, this might get me in trouble, we're not making progress, we're making music. Like we're not making theoretical progress. I'm just asking them to tell me what they think works, essentially, with the guitar.
Right.
And so that eventually ends up in the theoretical department. When we get there, what we can do is, you know, then we might explore, okay, you've got this series of notes, and there have been times where I've had the student name the scale, or we'll name the student, you know, they'll compile the notes that they learned. So if it's this, we'll give that a name, even if it's named after the student or something like that. And we'll try to figure out, okay, but the means of playing it on one string, that's a little bit tricky. So, okay, you can actually find these notes here too. You know, and then on and on. We can kind of, we can then explore kind of, okay, what are those notes? Or we could bump it to a key like the key of C, if note names are a new phenomenon, and just kind of, you know, talk about why that key is a little bit more familiar to explore. I studied saxophone with Julius Brooks for 2 years, and he would say there are no hard keys, just less familiar keys. So sometimes, it makes sense to kind of go to the key of C, deal with some natural notes, and just start to piece together the guitar through playing. And it's not to say that I like completely, that this replaces sight reading, things like that. We do read notation in my lessons, but the idea behind that is we would then use any kind of exercise they learn to explore improvisationally as soon as possible. So even if they learn something out of a book or something like that, you know. Another recent exercise I did with a student was like, she learned Mary Had a Little Lamb, but she likes Billie Eilish, so we did Mary Had a Little Lamb with the Ocean Eyes melody from Billie Eilish. I just pitched that to her, and she took right off with it because it's innately in her. So, and that's the beautiful thing about improvisation is everybody does it, you know, and I just think that's a beautiful thing about humanity.
Absolutely. So, well, we're going to have to wrap it up there, but we are going to be taking a look at your studio here in the next segment. So thank you for taking us out there for that, and thank you for being here today, man. This has just been
a pleasure.
Incredible insight into your teaching philosophy and the history of Seth Hedquist as it is.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me, and it's always good to see you. We don't see each other enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
But no, I always appreciate you having me on.
All right. So, well, thank you for that.
You bet.
Seth Hedquist, everybody.
All right, so welcome to the Seth Hedquist School of Music and Improvisation.
This is my student, Jeff Carnegie. He's been a student with me for 4 or 5 years, and he's been working on this really creative project. As with all the projects my students are working on currently, we don't write a whole lot down. We develop ideas by ear. And one song that he said he knew pretty well by ear is Come As You Are. So we've learned that largely by ear, and now we've started to actually kind of collaboratively intersperse some jazz concepts into this arrangement. But what you're hearing is something that's truly unique and something I really have fun playing and working on with him, and projects like this with my other students as well. So this is Come As You Are by Nirvana. Thanks for listening, Jeff Carnegie.
Well, thank you for tuning into the Guitar Department. I want to thank my guest, Seth Hedquist. Seth, thank you for having us out at your new studio. That was an awesome segment. We were very happy to be there. Pay no attention to the fact that we're wearing yesterday's clothes. How can people follow what you're doing with your new studio and when your new project with the history-inspired album? Progress on that?
Yeah, no, great question. SethHedquist.com. You can go there and shoot me a message. I try to keep it up to date. I'm not the most social media savvy human being, but I'm trying to get better. You can just find me on Facebook as well. I'm going to be starting a Seth Hedquist School of Music and Improvisation Facebook page soon. But find me on my website for now, SethHedquist.com. As far as my writing project, I would love to record it maybe sometime next year.
Okay.
I need money. So I probably have some grant writing to do, but I think there are some receptive ears to hearing sort of this like conglomeration of history and music. So so that's kind of my next goal, is to kind of look at ways that I could sort of
generate some income to be able to pay for studio time and musicians help and things like that.
I
So
got some people you should talk to then.
yeah, right.
More on that later, but I also want to thank Jackson, our producer, and Matthew, our camera operator, and be sure to check us out at facebook.com/The Guitar Department and our Instagram page at @guitar_department. And with that, would you play us out with some
Sure,
Barber
let's do
Blues?
it.